Hi everyone, and welcome back to my vlog, KidLit Corner, where I chat everything children's books and the people who create them. This is episode number 6 today, and a very special episode. We have an uber talented guest, very talented and acclaimed children's author, and a great mentor and friend to me and many in the KidLit community, wonderful Wendy Orr. Wendy Orr is an Australian author, an award-winning, internationally published and acclaimed author. She has been publishing books for nearly 36 years. She's written 50 books, novels, chapter books, skinny books, picture books. She's written a handful of short stories for various anthologies. The book you might know her best for is a true Australian classic, Nim's Island. Incidentally, it was the first Australian children's book to be made into a Hollywood feature film. You can see the poster for the film just behind me with some of Wendy's other titles on the windowsill. But of course, you know Nim's Island, but you might know a few others, such as Dragonfly Song, which was a CBCA shortlisted book. It also won the Prime Minister's Literary Award for Wendy. Peeling the Onion, a CBCA honour book. A lot of people definitely know this YA novel. It's another true classic of Wendy's. And most especially Wendy's latest book, which is Honey and the Valley of Horses, published in Australia just last year by Allen and Unwin. But there is a new version with a new title and a beautiful new cover called Out of the Valley of Horses, which has just been published by Pajama Press in Canada and North America. So if you haven't already, make sure you pick up a copy of Honey in the Valley of Horses, a very magical, enchanting, special story and Wendy's latest, and one of my new favorites. Wendy has been published in so many countries, been translated into so many languages: Spain, Canada, North America, Italy, Germany, Japan, Korea, Denmark, France, Poland, the UK, Vietnam. So many. And of course, Australia. Her awards locally and internationally run literally into the dozens. There's way too many to list. But if you visit Wendy's website at wendyorr.com, you can read all about her work yourself. Wendy currently lives and writes in a beautiful spot in Victoria near the bush and the beach with her family. Wendy, I'm so glad to see you today. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Well, thank you, Brenton. And I do think that if ever I need to know something about my career, I think I'll just go to you.
Please
Um,
do.
because I think you know some of these things better than I do.
I'm a go-to if you ever need, but so many wonderful books, so it's so much fun to know about them and to learn about them. I mentioned Honey in the Valley of Horses as that's your newest book, but I would like to just take a little step back in time, and I want to show you something.
That is a little step back.
Amanda's Dinosaur by Wendy Orr, illustrated by Gillian Campbell. This was Wendy's very first book, published in 1988 by Ashton Scholastic. Now, as I understand it, Wendy, you were crossing the street with a friend, and the friend turned to you and said, "Oh, I'm working on writing a book." And you thought, "Why haven't I been doing that? That's what I wanted to do once." And this was in the mid 1980s. And you thought, "Well, I'll write Mills and Boons." And then you thought you might enter the Vogel Award. But you came to children's books and you found the Ashton Scholastic Picture Book Contest, and Amanda's Dinosaur and your career of the last 36 years was born. Can you give us a little rundown on your beginnings and how this book and your journey to publishing sort of began?
Yeah, because exactly as you said, it just made me think, when am I going to do that? I said I'm going to do it all my life. And I was actually doing like a little postgraduate, I guess, but a little course
Mm.
in occupational therapy. And I thought, okay, I'd already decided I didn't think I really wanted to like to go on and do my master's, but I really did want to do something else. Because all we had was, I had two very small
Yeah.
children and a job and a farm. But I just felt I still needed something to push me intellectually. And so, yeah, I thought, I really am going to start writing. And I literally mailed off the last assignment of this sensory integration course on uh, the 24th of December. And I've been saying the first, it was probably the 2nd of January, I started writing. And I just kind of wrote everything that came to my head. Um, and I actually had never thought about writing children's books, which might sound strange. Um, but I think partly it was that old misconception that you would have to be able to draw as well if you had illustrations. And so I just didn't sort of think of that. And I just kind of played around with different things all year. And then partway through that year, I saw the Australian Vogel. I think it was the last year I was going to be able to enter it. So I wrote really fast, as you do, because, can't be that hard. And I wrote a children's manuscript, which, of course, didn't it wasn't shortlisted for the award. But these are kind of the olden days of publishing. I sent it off to a publisher, and they, like told me some of the things wrong with it. As in, they wrote me a 4-page letter. I mean, of course, I had no idea how lucky that was.
Yeah.
It was the first thing I'd send out. So I didn't really understand that I was really, really lucky to get that criticism. And later on, the kids and I, when Amanda's Dinosaur had been published, I mean, not that it got like huge interviews, you don't really get interviews in the age about a picture book about a dinosaur. But the kids and I actually decided together that that first manuscript was ours and we didn't want it published.
Mm.
And I think that was a smart decision, because it was so special to us, because I was so clever to make up this story for them. And yes, and then the Mills and Boon, you're absolutely right. My friend had actually written a Mills and Boon, and in the end, she actually wasn't published, but she got so close. They kept asking her for sending off the first 3 chapters, and they would ask her for the end. And I thought, well, I I could do that. They can't be that hard. I mean, I just can't believe now how arrogant I was. But sometimes, you need to be stupid to jump into things that are hard. So I hadn't actually ever read a Mills and Boon. I'd read a bit when I was babysitting once, one that was left in the bathroom, and I thought, well, you could probably do this. And of course, the truth is, you can't write something that you don't love. Oh, maybe some people can, but in that case, you certainly have to know them. So I did eventually read 10, and I thought that would be all you would ever have to read. But of course, I kept trying to improve them for them because, what would they know about their formula? So I tried to sort of jazz it up a bit, make it a bit more complicated. And surprise, surprise, they didn't want my formula. And they actually said, we don't think you have the magic it takes to write a Mills and Boon. And I mean, I was really cross.
Yeah.
Because and having, decided I knew better how to write this story, I had got invested in my characters, and I went outside and dug up the garden and everything. And then my husband said, if you're gonna fail at something, you might as well fail at doing something you really like.
Yeah.
So I thought, right, let's try and write what I want to write. And I went on experimenting. I think I wrote a historical like First Fleet novel. Uh,
No.
because, you know, I would be able to get it out just in time for the centenary, and I had no idea that publishing actually took a little while. And and I just kind of experimented. And then at the end of the year, I saw this Ashton Scholastic competition, as you said. In fact, my friend and I shared a writing magazine subscription. And I can't remember what it was called now. Of course, it's now defunct. But I do remember reading an article by Hazel Edwards in it. And that's kind of always stayed with me, just that kind of link, as I, of course, knew her later. And so I, anyway, had this competition, and it was just for the text. And that was the first time I'd understood that you didn't actually have to draw the pictures,
Mm.
and you could write a picture book if you couldn't draw. And although Amanda's Dinosaur was my first attempt at a picture book, I think the point is my kids were 3 and 5 that year, or 4 and yeah. They sort of, from during that time, they were sort of 3 to 4 to 5 and 6. And I also used picture books at work
Mm.
because I was pediatric OT. And so I was kind of steeped in picture books. I knew their rhythm. And I think that's why I was able to enter into it and be so lucky the first time. And then that just opened up this whole kind of, oh, I could write children's books. I love children's books. I still have, until my great mildew disaster, sort of like all my children's books from my own childhood. And because they mean so much to me, not just
Yeah.
because I'm a hoarder or something. So I switched over to children's books, and well, apart from this great blockbuster that I was also going to write, which actually gave me the basis for Dragonfly Song much later. But the interesting thing was, it wasn't all smooth sailing once I got that first book. And the next 3 titles, I think, were rejected by Scholastic. And it was probably a year of kind of really, sending things out. And then Kathy Tasker had actually been the commissioning editor at Scholastic when Amanda won the manuscript award, and she was now at HarperCollins. And so, sometimes you need to be with the right person, and somebody can be a brilliant editor, and you might have written a brilliant book, but if they don't match, if your editor doesn't really love your book, it's not going to work. So, I met up with Kathy, and then I published with HarperCollins for quite a long time. And but there were other hiccups. There was a fairly major hiccup with sending a manuscript to a company that I think I won't name right now. And the day that I sent it, they went from being a trade publisher to an educational publisher. So they accepted the manuscript, but I had no idea of the differences with educational publishing. And then they eventually asked me for about 10 books, which I wrote. And then there were changes in the company, and they fired the editor who'd built up this huge program and brought in someone more experienced, and they sent everything back. And I actually fainted.
Oh, how
I was so
crushing.
distressed.
Oh.
And then they asked for a couple of them back and did a really bad job. So it was not completely smooth.
Mm.
Um, but I was still really, really lucky with, just the way things happen
Yeah.
generally.
I'm curious to know, so you won the contest with Amanda, and then you say you sent out the next three stories were rejected, and then the awful educational publisher debacle. Were, were you, did you have ambitions of I'm going to make this, like you were working as an OT, did you want to make writing a career or was it just something you enjoyed? Like, were you proactively, I want to be a novelist, like I want to keep going and I want to publish regularly? What was the level of sort of ambition, I suppose, or did you have a goal in 5 years, I want to have achieved this with my next book after Amanda? Like, what was your sort of thinking around that time? I'm curious.
Um, Not so much in years,
Mm.
but kind of as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I very much wanted to be a writer. I did think about it, and I thought that um, being a writer is a solitary
Mm.
occupation, as we all know. Um, we lived on a farm, and I am a relatively social person. I need lots of time on my own, but I do like seeing people occasionally.
Mm.
And so I decided, so my ideal goal was I was going to work 3 school-length days a week. Um, and then I could like drive the kids to school. At that stage, so we moved in the middle. That was actually when I broke my neck. But
Mm.
so we were living on one farm when I wrote Amanda. And then yeah, the first three were still published while we were lived on that farm, and then we moved to another farm, and then my kids got scholarships to grammar school in Shepparton, which was our nearest town. And I thought, so the ideal would be if I worked school hours. You see, I could actually drive the kids to school and work the 5 hours or
Mm.
whatever the school day works out at, and take then drive the kids home, and then that would give me socialization. I'm not sure now if I realized just how dicey a writer's income was.
Mm.
I sort of thought it would be a bit more progressive, that I had one book out and then next time I would make more money, and that, in a few years I would be able to, to just work a few, less than half time as an OT. But yeah, very much once I made that commitment, um, like basically the evening after I saw my friend and I'd finished working it out, I was actually totally committed.
Yeah.
So before that, I was still writing in my head, um, you know, but it really from that 1st of January, I just was totally committed to actually becoming, an author,
Yeah.
not 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 a hobby writer.
Yeah. And we are so glad that you did.
Oh, thank you,
Obviously,
Brenton.
obviously. I I want to move on to just those next couple books and next sort of chapter of your life and with Kathy. But first I want to ask, do you remember the first time you saw a copy of your very first book and how that felt when it was actually published?
Well, surprisingly enough, yes. I mean, I, I'm not a really self-confidence person,
Yeah.
and what I remember most is we actually went to Sydney, and we went to the Scholastic offices, and we saw. We must have seen some roughs. No, we didn't even see roughs then. It was just
Oh,
that I met the publisher, and she gave me Gillian Campbell, the illustrator's
yeah.
name, and I guess phone number.
Oh,
I felt, oh my God, this is a really important person. I can't bother her. Now, she would not have given me the name if she hadn't thought I could bother her. But I didn't have the nerve to approach a real illustrator. And, and so the first time I saw them, I think was, I may have this wrong, but I think that it was actually when they sent the art back. The art actually came back to me by mistake instead of Jillian.
Oh,
So,
so you got a
and
little peek.
oh, but a little peek, I mean, there it was giant art.
Oh,
It
wow.
was, and so I pictured, of course, that the book is this big, so the pictures will be this big.
Yeah.
But they were like, oh, my hands are off the screen, they're
Wow.
they were really big. And looking at them, oh, it was so moving. It was just um yeah, it was a lot like the first time I saw the film. It was like, oh, this is like family photos that I've never seen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like a little tiny bit of it was, you know, I think she'd actually used her own daughter or something. I may have made that up, but Amanda, she's sort of a 4-year-old little blonde girl.
Mm.
I had a 4-year-old little blonde girl, you know, uh, it was, but it was so much deeper than that. Yeah. And to see the book, and of course it came out in hardback first, because this was the olden days. And um, just so moving.
Yeah.
And actually, I will tell you that when the mail came to say that it was going to be published, this is quite a funny story. Because I was at work and my husband went down to the mailbox on the tractor and picked this up and he read it. And the letter was actually such a discouraging letter.
Mm.
It was, so I'm saying I won, but in some ways that wasn't even true. It's like, well, we had a lot of entries and they were, pretty hopeless. But anyway, two of them are good enough to publish, but we want you to make changes. So we're not awarding any first prize. Just you and this other book are the kind of winners. And so my husband actually said he'd actually started to crumple the letter up because he was so angry. It's like reading down about sort of like, what's the point of writing to tell her that all these entries were hopeless? I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course, he didn't quite say that, but yeah, it did really.
Yeah.
And then he got to the bottom line and this was sort of cropping farms, so like long driveways. So then he raced up the neighbor's driveway on his tractor, sort of the kilometer up the drive, waving the letter, saying, "When is it going to be published?"
Oh, that's great. Oh, wow. Oh, thank God he finished reading it. Wow.
Yes, yes.
Oh, and it is out of print, but I
Yes.
know it is still at some state libraries and council libraries. So if anyone is able to track down a copy of Wendy's first ever book, you'll definitely enjoy it. Wow, what a story behind that. How great. And then you say, you had the next few were rejected, but I think I have it right that the second one that was published with Kathy, it started life as a dog named Toby and became the Tin Can Puppy. And then I think not long after it was Bad Martha as well,
That's
was
right.
around the same time.
Yeah, I think they were a year apart.
Yeah. But both with Harper or Angus and Robertson with Kathy. And I know Kathy, she's worked on later books of yours as well. What
Mm.
what can you just say a little about that relationship with you and Kathy and that editor-writer relationship and what that was like?
Well, yeah, and I think Kathy set me up for really, really understanding what an editor brings. And
Mhm.
so I've worked with quite a few editors now over the years. And it's such an important relationship in your
Mm.
life. Um, and I think often people who haven't written
Mm.
or just starting right, and they say, but oh, how could an editor change your precious words?
Yeah.
Well, apart from educational publishing, where yes, okay, sometimes you do feel that, they don't change your precious words. And sometimes your words are not actually that precious, or they're precious to you, but they're not actually that great. And I mean, the bottom line is, of course, your editor actually wants the same thing that you do, like to publish the best book possible. But it's actually it's just more than that. The joy of it is often just somebody else loves this book. Somebody else loves these characters. Someone is hearing what you're saying. And when they edit or criticize, it's often because they're hearing what you're saying, but actually you're not saying it very well.
Mm.
And, if we kind of rewrote that, maybe everybody would hear what you're saying.
Yes.
And so I think I was lucky with Kathy to have, a very experienced editor
Mm.
when I was so new. And uh, yeah, just a really nice, gentle introduction into, yeah, the world of publishing, but the world of literature. I mean, I don't have a literature background. I was an OT, it was
Mm.
applied science at an English private school for occupational therapy. We moved to university the year after I
Right.
finished. But we didn't get kind of any cross-cultural things anyway. I don't have all that background. And so Kathy was a great introduction
Mm.
to all that. And her husband actually gave me another great introduction that I said something about, oh, I always just burn my drafts as soon as I finish them. And yes, exactly. That was the face he made. Because he was, and I may have this wrong, but I think he was like a curator at the State Library of New South Wales. And he's
Ah.
going, no, 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 you have to save them. So after that, I started saving them, and all my papers now go to the I always get the order wrong, but it used to be the Lou Reeves, now the
Mm.
Australian National Centre for Australian Children's
Yeah,
Literature.
I think, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Um,
NCACL, yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, they go there now. And
Mm.
after the first box I sent, they said, well, it's great that you're such a good sort of conservator of and conservationist because you reuse everything, but you might not want to use bank statements for your scrap paper that you send into the archive. So I've learned a lot from everybody over the years.
Yeah, that's great. Those are those two ones. I encourage people to check them out at the libraries or rare bookshops. They're really fun reads. You had, and then you had a few more after that. Chew by you and
Yes,
Ruth
I think a two
O'Hare.
was written before then and published after.
Right.
Yeah, that
Um, but
makes sense.
there was one which you mentioned earlier that you had a really awful accident in, was it 1991,
Yes,
1992, 1991?
1991. So it was actually only a few months after Bad Martha came out.
Right, right. And I know that that period just afterwards is when you wrote this book and it was published, Leaving It to You. I think it was I think it received a shortlist on the day that you were packing up your office to leave your job as an OT. Is that right? It happened around, it
Yeah.
was around that time?
Um, yes, so the book was actually written and I think accepted before my
Oh,
accident.
before. Okay.
And but it came out after because I remember trying to edit and it was so hard for the young editor that I was working with them to, or the may even have been a copy editor, I don't remember now, to understand that I could only like read a few pages a day. And so I've often thought that it's like Leaving It to You is the book I wrote as an OT. And then of course I know you want to mention later about Peeling the Onion.
Yeah.
But yes, Leaving It to You is, I feel like it was so good to me because it did give me something like that hope, because it was already contracted. And yes, and then the shortlisting. So I knew a bit about the shortlist then,
Mhm.
but not very much.
Yeah.
And I again, I have a bit of a story about my husband, because you got to remember this is before mobile phones were common. They existed, but we didn't have them. So I actually booked an appointment with a psychologist to do the grieving the day I cleaned out my office, which was
Mhm.
18 months after the accident. And I
Mhm.
finally admitted that I wasn't going to be well enough to get back to work since I couldn't stand up. And I got into the psychologist's office, and the receptionist greeted me with, "Your husband's been leaving messages for you all morning. I don't understand, but it's something about a short list." And I just burst out laughing. And that, I have to say, as a grief appointment, that was a bit of a waste of a psychologist appointment. It was that was like the kindest thing the universe could
Mhm.
have done for me at that moment. It was incredible. It
Yeah.
was, life will go on.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And we've talked about this off camera, but I love this book. It's one of my very favorites that you've ever written. I've loved it since I was like 11 or 12 years old, and it's just wonderful. And I just want to show everyone that Wendy signed a copy of Leaving It to You. I keep it wrapped in plastic on my shelf to keep it nice and safe because it's my treasured signed copy. That's how much I love this book.